Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 11 of B-Road Ballers, the review series for the hot hatches, big and small in spec and size, on Gran Turismo 6. And in this episode we're featuring pretty much a cult classic car really among JDM enthusiasts, specifically JDM hot hatch enthusiasts. I get the impression not quite as popular as the Civic Type R, but still very, very popular. And it is the 1997 Toyota Starlet Glanza. Now this car, I have to say, is not a car which I gave much thought to prior to this series. And it doesn't have particularly inspiring specs on paper. It's not a bad car on paper, it just doesn't sound like anything special really. It's got a 1.3 litre engine, front wheel drive, and the PP is well under 500. So, not really that impressive compared to many of the other hot hatches in this series on the surface of things. However, when you actually think about what this car can do from its very modest spec, it's actually not hard to see why it's a cult favourite. Now, I'm not saying that this is a favourite of mine, but I'm not a huge Japanese hot hatch fan anyway. I tend to prefer their mid-level coupes. But this car is certainly a very good little hot hatch. Now what does it have to offer? Because you don't see a huge amount of people using this on Gran Turismo, or I don't anyway. You see far more people using the Civic than you do the Glanza. Well, it's front-wheel drive, as we said. It's got a 1.3 litre turbo engine. And fully tuned, it puts out 264 horsepower. Which, as I said, doesn't sound all that impressive compared to some of the other cars in this series, like the Golf R32 or even the GTI or various other vehicles. However, that's pretty good for a 1.3 litre engine. It also puts out 188 pound-feet of torque, which, again, isn't exactly anything to write home about, but for an engine of its size, which is not surprisingly, like the Honda Civic, more inclined towards high-revving power rather than low-range torque, it's not too surprising that it produces that amount. The good thing about this car, though, is the weight. It's very, very light. Quite a lot lighter than the Civic Type R, in fact, at 803 kilos. And that's actually a very good weight for another reason. This isn't a particularly small hatchback. I'm not saying it's big, but it's no K car. It's definitely a decent-sized hot hatch, about the same kind of proportions as, say, a Polo. So it's definitely not an extremely small car, so for its size, the weight is actually very good. And the power-to-weight ratio per tonne, despite not having a massive amount of power, thanks to that ultra-low weight, it still puts out 329 horsepower per tonne. That's impressive. And the PP, as I said, is well under 500, which could seem like a disadvantage at 483 PP. But when you actually think about it, 264 horsepower and 803 kilos is exactly the kind of spec you'd want to have at 483 PP. Because that means that you could easily down-tune this car to, say, 475, which is a massively popular category, and you'd have a decent amount of power and hardly any weight, which means, of course, that you can add ballast to bring it down to that level without really any major comeback from that in a negative way. Now, it's front-wheel drive, so you don't really want a huge amount of torque anyway, so that's not a problem, not having all that much, in the same way as the Civic Type R, and also other hot hatches in general that are front-wheel drive. And one of the advantages of front-wheel drive, like virtually all of the other front-wheel drive hot hatches, is it means you don't need any camber whatsoever. And as such, this car can absolutely fly around corners, thanks to that front-wheel drive and also thanks to how light it is. You can throw this car around the track like a little racing car, to be honest. Obviously it's not as quick as a racing car in a straight line, but the speed that you can take corners at in this vehicle is really impressive, again, for that power and for that PP. Another great thing about this car is that it's significantly cheaper than many of the other hot hatches. Many of the hot hatches on the game are around 30, 40 grand. This is only 14,000 credits, so it's silly cheap, really, considering how good it actually is. And this is one of those hot hatches which I would recommend to someone who's looking for lower than usual PP racing as well, because plenty of people race at 500 or 475 or 450, etc. But when you're looking to race, say, in ultra low PP categories, say 375 or even 350, most hot hatches would have to be significantly down-tuned to get into those levels, and you can really feel it when you down-tune those cars. With this car, because the PP isn't all that massive anyway, and because it has good performance for its spec, you can down-tune it to that level and it will still be a highly competitive machine. So overall, although, as I said, it's not one of my favourites, I can understand why people like it so much. It's a very good little speciality car, and one which definitely deserves more use. So that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.